So we want to welcome you today to our session on Pause and Pivot, where big ideas meet real life. I'm Margarita V, and today I'm joined by my amazing co-hosts, Archana and Colin. Hello. Just to get going, I wanted to ask, what if the most powerful upgrade to your brain, your mood, your immune system, and even your lifespan, isn't a supplement, isn't another mindset hack or a new productivity system? But as we're going to look into today, what if that is sleep? So today we're going to explore Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. Another big book. Oh my gosh, back to back. Like last time was Molecules of Emotion by Candace Pert, and now we're like Why We Sleep. So this book makes a bold claim that sleep is no longer optional, my friends. It is foundational. So let's begin. So checking in, Colin and Archana, before we get into the science and this amazing author, I'd love to just ask you, where you guys are at with your ideas and your practices of, in general, sleep. What's your relationship with sleep? I'd love to know.
So I have had a very unhealthy relationship with sleep. Um, I didn't sleep much last night, just like every day or every night rather. And so this book is so crucial, critical in informing my life, and also just a framework. This is such a huge shift of looking at sleep as a performance tool. So it's mind blowing.
Love it.
So really excited. Thank you again for choosing this book. It's amazing.
Another heavy hitter. How about you, Colin? What are your initial ideas? What's your
Well, I'm
relationship
gonna
with
I'm gonna
sleep?
try and keep this short, but as you know, in 1994, I went through a pretty big transition, right? And part of that, which was unexpected, was prior to the experience of expansion, I slept at the most 5 hours, 5 to 6 hours a night at the most. Typically was up watching TV, whatever, till one midnight or one, up at 6 to go play racquetball or whatever. That was my lifestyle. When I started meditation and I had this expansion, I can still remember within a week, I would the traditional mode between my wife and I was she would chat with me until she drifted off, and then I would get up and go do whatever I'm going to go do. I started falling asleep when my head hit the pillow, and she was like poking me, like, "Dude, I'm talking to you, man."
Yeah.
And that's how my life was for the majority of the time. But it's interesting, over the last probably 4 or 5 years, I've started doing this thing where I wake up at 3 in the morning and I have to go in my meditation space because I can't get back to sleep. So anyway, that's kind of my relationship. So I'm curious to hear what this book has to say.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And we're all over the place. We really are. Everybody's unique at our different stages and states in life. And so if you're watching this recording, we invite you to just pause for a moment and check in. Where are you at right now with sleep? What are your beliefs around it? What's your ideal? Like, how many hours of sleep are you aiming to get? And not really focusing on what you should be doing, but right now, we encourage you to grab your worksheet. If you're joining, you can get a worksheet QR code at the end of the session where you can just capture your big ideas and insights from this chat on this idea. So using your tracker, are you keeping track of your sleep? Are you using an Oura ring or something to just really document in reality what we're sleeping, not what we think we're doing, right? And we'll share a little bit more about why that's so important. And you can even just put down in your notes what's one word that describes your sleep quality. Is it scattered? Is it consistent? Are you a sleeping queen or a sleeping king? So what's your relationship right now? And then let's go ahead and zoom out for a moment and look at the author, this amazing author of this book of Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. So Matthew Walker is a neuroscientist and sleep researcher whose work spans decades of studying the biological as well as the cognitive and societal impacts of sleep. I mean, he had this quest, this search for like so many questions that the more he learned about sleep, the more he wanted to learn and ask more questions. So this is not a motivational book. It's not a lifestyle hack guide. It's a comprehensive scientific argument that sleep is one of the most powerful determinants of human health and performance. So this book unfolds in basically four parts. Part one is going to be about this thing called sleep. So, getting right into the nitty gritty. What the heck is sleep? And he explains what it is, the different stages, the architecture of sleep, the circadian rhythm, and why sleep is biologically universal across species, all animals, all birds, even the dolphins and whales, which we think didn't used to sleep. Part two is why you should sleep. Okay, so let's dive in. Here he explores what sleep does for learning, memory, and then the consolidation of all of the things we're learning. And also, our theme for this month is all about emotions, right? So it's about emotional regulation, as well as the physical components of immune defense, how it impacts our cardiovascular health, metabolism, and longevity. So by now, you're starting to think, what does sleep not impact, right? So part three, he goes into an amazing dive on how and why we dream. So what are our ideas around dreaming, right? This section dives into the difference between REM and non-REM sleep, how it impacts our creativity, our emotional processing, and what he calls overnight therapy. Woo woo. Can you say therapy? Woo woo. Every night we have this opportunity to dive in. Okay, and then part four, the last part, he holds no bar. This is from sleeping pills to society transformed, my friends. Walker expands the lens to say how sleep impacts us individually. And if we're taking sleeping pills, let's get real on the impacts on that. And he talks about kids and school start times, the impacts that is having in their biological development of their brains, their ability to focus, their energy, the neurological impairments that might be happening if we're having our kiddos wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And then he focuses on workplace culture and what a deep culture might be focusing on sort of a sleep-informed society, what that might look like. So he paints the picture and invites us to dive in. So this book was amazing. Again, really big, really amazing. And what made it really powerful for me was it's not just data. He really does show the consistency in the conclusion that it's not about just you. It's the whole system, how sleep is connected to our healthcare, how that's connected to the diseases we might be having, how it's connected to how we relate to people, how we show up at work, and if we show up in reactive mode. It's like on and on and on and on. Basically, he says, no part of us is untouched when sleep is reduced. So you guys, that's kind of like the overview of the book. And again, this one took about 10 hours to read, but it was amazing. I underlined so much of it, and there's so many great goodies in here. So what are you guys most curious to dive in those areas? We're going to get into some common myths, but just checking in to see what stood out for you guys.
Thank you for that amazing overview. I think for myself, this is a systemic shift, huge systemic shift, health-wise, and also culturally. It's a cultural shift. Having grown up in New York City, where, the city that never sleeps, is open 24/7, having embraced that even as a child, hardwired for that almost, to the point where I almost wanted to mirror Wall Street and the hustlers. I want to be just like the hustlers. I want to be up all night. I can stay up all night. I can pull all-nighters in school. It just became systemic, my systemic way, culturally, showing up from my teenage years. And then it never stopped. And then it was so feeding into my hustle culture, and that embracing that, of course, I've got to show up. I've got to show up, and I'm on. Like the lights are always on. And that really set me up for failure, frankly, in the long run. But I thought, including as an adult, going through some pretty, I guess, more like a responsive way as far as to crisis and then becoming a ongoing response to crisis, always there's no time to sleep because there is always something going on and I'm processing, and I almost would use sleep as a way because I was overloaded with information to actually systemically handle my problems.
Yeah.
So this is for me, and considering also just in terms of reframing my health, this is for me a real, as I said, at a crucial point in my life. So thank you for that. Just really a systemic overview. No more.
That's it, right? What is the big idea of sleep? And then just pausing, like, wait a minute, let's learn how it's actually impacting me, like you just said, in all those amazing ways. So many of us are pulled in so many directions and focusing on the power of sleep to help us. So thank you for sharing that.
And I guess for me, because for the longest time it was just a thing, I would sleep and not have any issues or problems. And like I say, it's not been that long ago that for whatever reason I just found myself waking up at like 3 in the morning and like wide awake, not like but like wide awake. And so for a while I tried to fight it, and finally I just said, look, I'm awake, I'm going to just go. And after a while of doing that, my wife said, look, it seems like you're building this into your system. That's probably not a healthy way to go. Now, the one good thing is my family, we shut down pretty early. The boys are in bed by 8:30, and Gilly is definitely shut down by 8:30. And so it gives me the opportunity, if I'm bumping up against some real exhaustion, I'll go to bed at 8:30 and get 10 hours of sleep. But I guess more than anything, the more I've read about it and the more I've realized how, because it's directly related to longevity. And I'm at that point in life where longevity has a concern for me. I'm like, I'm wanting longness in my life. And so this topic is one, it prompted me to buy my Apple Watch so I can monitor my sleeping. And I've got yep. And I've started trying to use my heart rate variability training at night to try and get myself slowed down. But I have yet to do the shut down from blue lights at least a half hour before. I know that's a thing. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm at right now. And I guess the other thing is dreams, that REM sleep. I'm always curious about that part of life. And I know the studies have been done that says if you don't get enough of that REM sleep, you'll go a little cray cray. And so I always try to remember my dreams if I can.
Wow, Colin, thank you. Thank you for sharing all those resources that you're already, mastering and taking in and utilizing. And,
Just to
you're
clarify, there's no mastery yet.
master of the moment. We try new things and we see how they work. That's our jam here. And I got Jim an Oura ring at one point for Father's Day because he works nights sometimes, and I was seeing how it's impacting him as an ER physician, and it was eye-opening to see those numbers. So yeah, when we can get those helpful diagnostic tools, we can wear them. I don't have mine on, but at night I put it on, and they just inform us. So thank you for sharing that and our continual exploration and curiosity of what happens in dreams, and how can I move towards more mastery, or at least more intentional connection with how we sleep. I'd love to dive into some myths because, with sleep, it's like we all have some ideas. We were all raised in a certain way. We were trained in school or in our workplace. Those five or six people we spend the most time with influence us, right? So if we get into a habit with something, especially like sleep, something we do every day, hopefully, we're going to do the same thing over again. So this book gives us the opportunity, why we sleep, to just look at some data, some research and so, to ask some hard questions. Why, if sleep is so important as a foundational aspect to our whole person wellness, why are we not having this as a core discussion in areas such as school, in workplaces, in our relationships? And so let's focus in first on Myth number one. A lot of people say, I'm fine on 5 or 6 hours, right? How many times have you heard that? Or even we have ourselves said that, or we even feel great about saying, oh yeah, I can do it. I'm a 5 or 6 hour person. And like you said, I'm getting up and I'm doing my racquetball or whatever to get going, right? But Matthew Walker basically says that for many high functioning adults, we quietly hold this belief and this practice that I'm okay. I function just fine on 5 or 6 hours of sleep. Or I have to. This is what I have to do because, of the way I'm living with work and kids and I want to get my favorite shows in at night, right? Well, he says, here's the data. The actual percentage of the population that can truly function on 6 hours or less of sleep without having a negative measurable impairment. Can you guys guess what the percentage is?
10%.
I was shocked when I knew because I read it, but I was shocked.
Less
1%.
than 1%. Less than
Less than.
1%. So if you round it up, it'd be less than 1%. So almost zero. That's a double donut, right? So if we're around real and really thinking like, oh, I can get by with 5 or 6 hours of sleep, whatever is causing us to think that, let's looking at the data to say, are we part of that less than 1%? And he says, here's the part that's really unsettling even more. When sleep deprived, we are profoundly less functional and we have poor judgment. So when we're less sleep deprived, we're less likely to say we're not performing very well. He compares it to alcohol intoxication, except we don't feel impaired. We still feel like we've got it, we're with it. He says that after just 1 week of 6 hour nights, cognitive performance drops to levels comparable to someone who has just been awake for 24 consecutive hours. Now, have you guys been awake for 24 hours? Jim does it sometimes, at work. He used to do 24-hour shifts. It's literally painful, right, to the brain, not to mention what it does to our circadian rhythm and all of the biological messages that's going on. So he says that that's not being just a little tired. He calls that being neurologically compromised. So here's the real question when we think about I'm okay with 5 or 6 hours. How many decisions are we making each week while we're mildly impaired? And we're calling it productivity. Thinking about that. Have either of you ever believed you were functioning with 5 or 6 hours of sleep?
All the time. It's like, I am a living mess. Absolutely. And I think especially when I became a mother, my body just, I just trained myself 5 to 6 hours, 3 kids. And then here's the thing. It became for me culturally in our family. And I realize now how it started with me because none of my 3 kids napped ever. So we were on. And I look back now and, a lot of this was my impairment, frankly, and it became, as I said, family culture. And it is not, it's definitely giving me pause. So, but I've realized, the error of my ways and that, it is a myth. It is absolutely a myth.
Frankly, that that statistic or the idea that 5 days in a row leaves you impaired. I say I really hope that's not true, but obviously there's documentation there. I do know that me compared to me 30 years ago, yeah, I feel it a lot more. I feel it a lot more as far as if I have 4 or 5 days in a row with just 4 or 5 hours of sleep, oh yeah, I'm totally aware of the effect. That place where I think I get a little bit in between is when I get maybe 4 hours straight for a while, then I wake up for an hour, then I get 2 more hours after. I at times have felt that it might as well, I should have just stayed up, because that second waking sometimes is really hard. I wonder, did he say anything about that, about splitting your sleep or how you need to have contiguous sleep or anything?
Yes, he did. He went into a lot of research on like diurnal creatures. We're diurnal, so we sleep, mostly. We prefer to be awake during the daytime, right? And so there were societies that slept twice, biphasic. I forget what the word was, but our society, though, has kind of shifted us to being mono session. But he says that we are still biologically wired to sleep one long one and then have a nap in the afternoon. And he says that's not cultural. So it's not just the siestas that we tend to associate, for Latinas or Spanish, Latin American people that they take siestas. It's not just them, it's everyone. And he even talked about a culture in Greece, in an ancient culture where the people lived to be 100. I forget what it's called, but and of course they have healthy lifestyle, but it's the sleep that he pointed out that they sleep the full 7, 8, 9 hours, and they take a nap. It's part of their, cultural way of shutting down in the afternoon. So after lunch, a couple hours after lunch, and in Spain, as you may know, it was very common where they would shut like the whole month of August. Everybody would go to vacation. So that was another thing on the opposite side of always being working, right? And valuing the power of rest. But he did say that most of our society and our work structures and our education have sort of not allowed us to stay in our natural way of sleeping with the 2 sessions. So yeah,
You
he
know,
goes,
I remember going to Argentina and they practiced the siesta. I had always heard of it. I had never experienced it, but the truth of the matter is I loved it. I loved having that break in the afternoon, get a nap, and then we would stay up later. Now, the one thing I can tell you that wasn't healthy is that they would end up eating their big, heaviest meal of the day at 10 o'clock at night, and that was never a good idea. But as far as the cyclone stuff, I really, really used to love it, and I used to think, oh my goodness, I'd love it if modern man could switch back to that tradition.
yeah, it was actually the
Yeah, and I
legend of Icaria. Sorry, men are nearly 4 times as likely to reach the age of 90 as American males. And they're called napping communities, the places where people forget to die.
wow. Yeah, I mean that was the case when I used to, and these were competing. So my family and I immigrated from India when I was 8, and we moved to New York City. And then my parents would take us back to India during the summers for 2 months. And it was torture for me. I remember because and we would stay with my mother's mother, her family, and everyone would just shut down. Everything would just shut down right after lunch. And my grandfather and my uncle they used to literally shut the factory down, and their employees, everyone would just go nap. And they would come home, have, make this elaborate meal. Everyone, would make an elaborate meal. And then it was like, okay, now it's time to shut down. Then we'll get up for tea at 4. And I would just disrupt everything. And I would want to just run around and cause, havoc. And my aunt and my grandma would be running after me, just like I would just rally up all the kids, and it was horrible. And I think back now, and it was because I was so fighting that cultural response. I'm like, no, this is the time we need to go play. We need to be out in the sun. And I just couldn't understand it. And then I unfortunately kept that attitude. Meanwhile, the whole family and everyone in the neighborhood was shutting down, and I was rallying all the kids to go run around the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So yeah, not the kind of disruption we want. So I regret
Yes.
it, obviously.
So the idea again of like what are our beliefs around sleep, and as we're talking about the impacts of our culture, whether it's our ancestral culture and family practices, the traditions, or more relevant to here in America, it's the workplace culture that for most adults really, and the education schools that kind of dictate where we can sleep and how much we can sleep. So, but the idea of, that we can really operate at a high level with 5 or 6 hours is completely debunked. And he goes into detail on, especially for kids in the part 3 and 4, he goes into the last 2 hours of sleep are absolutely critical. It's where everything has been kind of like already sifted through, everything that we don't need to integrate into our learning system and memories has been stripped away through the NREM state, the first stages, and then the REM sleep he just goes into, and that's the cutting edge of human evolution. So to really tap into our creativity, to allow the full restoration of us waking up fully integrated with all of that learning and knowledge. And that's just so critical. And for kids, it's when there is the neurological activity of building. So if they don't get that last 2 hours of sleep, from like 6 to 7 or 5 to 7 or 4 to 6 or something like that, they're actually impairing their development and growth. And he's tying it to perhaps looking at ADHD, different things for kids. So this is a serious question, a serious topic that needs to be looked into by leaders and organizations. So, okay.
I'm
Yeah.
just going to take this opportunity because that's something I'm happy to report. Personally, I conducted that inquiry and actually made a decision when my oldest was getting ready to go to middle school, and he was 12. And the county we were in, the middle school started. And I think I may have shared this with you already, Maggie, or maybe here. So the middle school actually started at 7:30. And so I, found out from neighborhood parents that the kids should actually be at the bus stop by like 6:30. And I thought, not my child, not our family, not, you know. And I then we just made a decision to move counties because the neighboring county was starting middle school at 9, which made more sense to me. And so I'm so glad I did that because knowing my child specifically, I mean, it just happened to be, knowing my oldest that would not, it just didn't compute. But I'm so glad I did that. And then it really made me wonder, how is this high function? And it's supposed to be one of the most well-regarded counties, in that state. And yet this was for me a huge challenge. And so, a real life example of that. Absolutely. I'm so glad I questioned that and acted on that.
Yeah. This is a topic we can go deep into. Other nations are starting with kids starting at 8 or 9. There are some counties in the U.S. that have done tests, starting them at 8 or 9, and they're showing markedly vast improvements in their testing. So, and then not only that, but the development of the brain for teens that need more sleep. This could be impacting their ability to form positive social bonds, to gain independence from parents, and to have more of that biological focus in the brain of it's really less NREM and more REM, and that's where they start to really get into, he calls it informational alchemy. That's where all of our ideas and brainstorming and innovations happen, and we're robbing it of our teens. And he connects it to perhaps increase in, again, ADHD, social anxiety problems with teens, and inability to actually think properly because the frontal cortex is the last part to develop in teens and early 20s. So if we deny them of their 12 hours of sleep that they need, it's not just a nice to have thing, and they're not lazy. He says teens are not lazy. They biologically need more time is to sleep. So,
And I think he tied it, sorry, Maggie, I think he even mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, to driving safety. I think there was some research, evidence-based research on that, which was, again, incredible.
we're going all over in this myth, right? It's like, what does 5 or 6 hours have to do with everything? We're talking about schools and education, how we show up in the workplace. Impaired driving because we are drowsy is one of the top national hazards, not just with accidents, but when we look at teens, when they go up and they start to sleep till 8 or 9, it drastically drops the rate of accidents. So if we just work with insurance companies and we start to really give bonuses for these things and give options on starting later, it's going to really drastically influence the number of lives we save and the number of car accidents. For a deeper dive into the impact of drowsy driving, we encourage you to get the book and check out chapter 7, where he goes into the impact of drowsy driving, that it exceeds the impact of alcohol and drugs combined in causing vehicle accidents, as well as the prevalence and the frequency and the call to action on the strategies we can take in the workplaces, technology, and what we can do as a society. So check it out for more details on chapter 7. So let's move on to myth number 2, okay? Because there's so much to dive into here. So how about this idea when we think of sleep? Do we think that it's just kind of a waste of time? You know, that I'll rest later and it's just about rest? And he says that many of us unconsciously treat sleep as a passive thing. Like we just lay down and then it's just like passive. That our brains kind of just shut off and it's rest. And the most amazing thing about this book is he's gone into it, again, decades, to research what actually happens in sleep, in the different parts of sleep, the REM, the rapid eye movement, or the non-REM, as well as dreams, right? And he makes a really radical claim. And he goes on to say that sleep is the single most effective thing we can do to reset brain and body health every day. Every day, it's the single most effective thing, right? So during deep sleep, the NREM, the first part, the brain activates the glymphatic system. And you guys know every time I bring that up, I just get so excited because it's like we need to know how the brain works, what goes on in there, and how we can be an active and collaborative partner to help our brain work better. So the glymphatic system is similar to our lymphatic system that helps to drain all those toxins from our lymph nodes, right? But in the glymphatic system, there are these glial cells that operate near our neurons. And at night, what happens, again, between like 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., the glial cells shrink and they literally make more space between the neurons. So there's a literal waste clearance mechanism, like a big fire hose that removes those toxic metabolic byproducts. So it's clearing the metabolic byproducts from the day, from what you're thinking. You know, we know what happens when we eat food, right? And the waste that goes out there. But the brain is doing a similar thing. And so there are these things that happens during sleep for the physiology. And he says that during REM sleep, so that's the second part, the rapid eye movement, that's when we're dreaming, that's when emotional circuits recalibrate. So in sleep deprived subjects, the amygdala, that part of our brain that's, that can tell us it's the brain's fear center, it becomes up to 60% more reactive. So think about it. When we are sleep deprived and when we see our kids sleep deprived, can we not see that they're perhaps more reactive, more fear-based? That's 60%, my friend. That's not a small number. So REM sleep restores communication between the amygdala, that fight flight area that signals, and the prefrontal cortex, the executive function of what we can self monitor our thoughts and behaviors. And so he describes this as a form of overnight therapy when we get enough of that REM sleep and the NREM sleep. So the question back to everyone watching is, what happens in a society that is chronically undersleeping? What happens to empathy, our ability to pause and really relate to others, or even be able to relate to ourselves, have self-empathy, if we're 60% more reactive? How does that impact conflict in our homes, in our community, on the streets, or even to polarization? So what do you guys think now? Is sleep just rest?
Definitely not. You know, I've heard anecdotal statements, stuff like this, over the years, but um, this is a great reminder because too many times I find myself even now looking at the societal challenges and assigning it to all kinds of stuff. But how crazy would it be if we found out that a vast majority of it could be mitigated through better sleep? Wouldn't that be weird? It's like, you know, you people, if you could have just had a nap every once in a while, we might have killed each other less. We might have been nicer, you know. Uh, I don't know. There's a part of it, but you know, really, when it gets down to it, Maggie, I have to admit that whole thing where um, you have a problem, look to the look to the easiest solution first. You know, what if that is really part of it? And just a sidelight, my youngest, who is Fragile X, extreme autism, ADHD, really, really tense, never slept. I mean, he never slept. And my poor wife bore the brunt of it. And then he went through a time where he seemed to sleep, but then the last 10 years, he just was like, we tag teamed him in the middle of the night. And he's 35 now. So just a few years ago. Thank God we found a doctor who he's not on sleeping pills. He's on an SSI, what do they call those? SSI inhibitor or whatever. Anyway, um, and it was a miracle for us. It was a miracle for us because we found ourselves literally. I felt like we were dying. I really feel like we were just slowly losing capacity to function. And that just changed everything. And since he's been sleeping, he goes to sleep at 8:30 at night and he wakes up at 6 in the morning. He's getting like solid 10 hours, 9, 10 hours every night. And he's a different human. He's a completely different human. Still challenging, but completely different. And we're very, very thankful.
Yeah. So glad, Colin, that you got that relief and that you're working with people to support you in that. It's no joke. People can die from sleeplessness. It's very rare. But the body functions on, having the thalamus, the hypothalamus, all these different parts to really kind of direct and work with the circadian rhythm so that all of the body's operations are working in sync. And he does tie into how lack of sleep is highly correlated with initiating episodes, mental health episodes. So he says that more attention, more studies should be done to really look at sleep as the first intervention instead of just going to sleeping pills for sure. That's the number one recommended intervention, not going to sleeping pills, but what he calls CBTI, so cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia instead of pills. And for kids, ADHD, he says that we need to look at sleep, number one. So I'm glad that you're looking into that and I'm glad that you got some relief. Seriously. Sleep is really not the absence of activity. He wants us to really, he paints a picture so that we understand that when we're sleeping, we're getting ourselves prepped for the next day. We're getting ourselves ready to integrate what we learned today. So if we're in school or if we're learning new skills at work, he says, if we're not sleeping, we're not going to be able to learn the next day. Or if we're not sleeping, we're not going to be able to retain what we just learned. And not just like memory things, he says, but what about immunizations? So this is totally a different focus, but highly relevant. We've heard so much focus on, immunizations and how some people are saying they're not working or it doesn't work for their kids. And so the question here is, if you don't sleep the night before you get immunization, like a flu shot, or for the last 2 to 3 days, then you can probably be generating less than 50% of the potential antibodies from that shot than if you were sleeping a full 7 to 8 hours. So Matthew Walker recommends. Why don't we get the systems working together so that when we schedule with our healthcare providers to get a flu shot, that they have access to, our smartphone or our watch, or we are tracking our sleep hours in some way so that when we are ready to do our immunization, we have had solid sleep for a week. And then we'll have closer to 100% of the ability for our body to generate those healthy antibodies. So that's just another facet of how important sleep is. And, in ways that we can just make this a systemic solution for how we can all work together and be smart about all those different ways that we are trying to stay healthy.
Yeah,
So,
that's incredible. I mean, I was just thinking in terms of, we're so used to, as far as healthcare, getting our blood panels, right? Our physical, we get a blood panel. And this is such an important, um, you know, uh, uh, declaration, frankly, you know, uh, that we do need to, an evidence-based, scientific, study. And I think it's really incredible in terms of, just from an operational, if you think about it, it's like we're so focused on the front end, how we are functioning in society, that we're not looking at the back end. And it's something as simple as this. I mean, this is really an important tweak that we need to have. So critical, really. Oh my goodness, it's incredible.
totally, totally. Here, I want to share some stats. I just found it on kids and sleep and education, if you guys don't mind. Um, More than 80% of public schools in the US begin before 8:15 a.m. Almost 50% of those start before 7:20. School buses arrive at 7:20. Starting time usually begins picking up kids at around 5:45 a.m. As a result, some children and teenagers must wake up at 5:30 or 5:15 a.m. Can you imagine doing that, Monday through Friday? Um,
And
so
then Maggie, I'm just going to add, just in my case, one of my big concerns was that my son, because where we were, our community was, so he was going to have to get up at 5:30, get on the bus, and then he had about a 35-minute commute because he wasn't I mean, he was in middle school. So the understanding was that he was going to have at least half an hour to 40 minutes on the bus. And so that was another question for myself. And I was like, why should a 12-year-old have a 40-minute commute? He's a child. We're almost like getting ready. This is a very sort of, response. I mean, to me, it was like a cultural conditioning happening for the workforce. He's going to expect a 30 to 40-minute commute. Get ready at 12 for that. So
yeah,
lots there to question.
yeah. And for African Americans and Hispanic kids, they're typically having to get up earlier because they do need to take the bus because their parents aren't able to take them with the car. And keeping in mind, we didn't even discuss this, but the circadian rhythm, which is like a normal sine wave, is very regular, right? For when we peak in our ability to signal with the body to wake up and when to go to bed. But for teens, their what's it called? Their circadian rhythm and their chronotype, when it's ideal for them to wake up, when it's ideal for them to go to bed, is offset from parents. And so he's rationalizing that, they need to gain a little independence from parents. And so that's why biology says, no, you can stay up later and wake up, later. But anyway, so a 5:15 a.m. start to a teenager is really like 3:15 a.m. Okay, so we're talking about REM sleep is what stands between rationality and insanity. That's what Michael Walker is saying. So this is not a short thing. I'm glad we're spending a lot of time on this. This is a conversation every single, school district should be having. A century ago, schools in the U.S. started at 9 a.m. So 95% of children woke up without an alarm clock. But anyway, so he goes on and on. If you want to read more about it, please, I encourage you to. There's a whole chapter on this. There's data, science, tons of research on this. And it's all about learning sleep, the two components of the circadian rhythm, which he describes as that sine wave, and then what's called the sleep pressure. So when you feel sleepy, like you can't get over it and you're just like, oh, I need coffee. he outlines it, you guys. It's just beautiful art. I'll see if I can find it real quick. But what happens, the longer we're awake, we build up sleep pressure by the body building adenosine in the body. So it's this chemical that basically signals us when we're sleepy. So there's a figure here. You can't really see it, but this one here. So the sine wave on the bottom, that's the circadian 24-hour cycle. It's actually a little bit longer and personalized. And then the top one is the adenosine, which builds as you wake up and then it goes down. The circadian rhythm is the other one. And the part where there's the biggest gap is where you're going to feel the biggest sleep. So like 11 p.m., it's the highest amount of adenosine and the lowest part of the circadian. So where our melatonin is peaked. So if you mess with that, then you are messing with like all of the different ways that your hypothalamus and your thalamus are communicating and sending signals to your biological organs and biological processes. And for the brain, for kids, we really need to look at it and take a deep dive on the developmental aspects of their brain. As early as 6 months, 1 year, they start to really connect with circadian rhythm. If we don't let them sleep when they should, it can literally impact them for life.
And when you speak of brain health, we're also talking about gut, right? Health. So that's the other thing. When I was working at alternative high school, we would have staff meetings. And in one of the staff meetings, I noted that the nurse shared, a lot of the kids were coming in to her office, to the nurse's office, just so they wanted to go to the bathroom. And maybe there was embarrassment, there were issues. And I thought it was a really, really critical data point. And unfortunately, and I brought it up and I was like, we need to really look at this. I mean, if the kids are going there for bathroom breaks, because, it's affecting gut health, it's all of it. It's the interoperability of the functionality of it. And there was such a dismissiveness, frankly, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I think, again, in the back end of things, policy, I think this can really inform this book, this groundbreaking study. His work is really phenomenal. In terms of its potential, I don't know, for really a critical need for reevaluation in education.
And that's all we're doing. It's just asking people to pause and rethink, like, what are my beliefs? What am I actually doing? And let's learn about the amazing power of sleep as, like you said, a productivity tool, in all the different ways: gut health, function, emotional, resilience, our ability to regulate our emotions and relate to people. And then let's move on to myth number 3, which is, I'll catch up on the weekend. Okay, how many of us have actually said that and lived that all through college, so much of the time? And it seems like, yeah, that's something we can do. But by now you've probably heard that, there's really no catching up. He does distinguish between what he says acute recovery, like when you go through no sleep, and then the chronic biological strain, like every day, sort of just chipping away at our resilience. He says that one of the striking findings after just one night where you have 4 or 5 hours of sleep, natural killer cell activity, critical for our immune defense and cancer prevention, drops by up to 70%. That's 70. So if we're getting colds and flus, or we have, cancer in our family and we're worried about that, what can we do to step in and boost our immune system? And if we are getting those, every now and then, 4 to 5 hours of sleep, our immune system is being compromised. The critical natural killer cells are being reduced by 70%. So,
it just so happened, sorry, Maggie, that I ended up staying up extra late last night. And so I apologize, but I'm going to go have a nap right now.
I love it. I love it. No, I love it. It's
that is a shocking statistic. That freaks me out. 70%? it's almost going to make me afraid to not be asleep. Seriously.
Respect, right? Sleep deserves respect for what it's doing for us. It's not inactive. We are setting ourselves up to not just, flush out the toxins, but to allow the body to begin that healing process. So when we go to bed with a full belly, we always say, don't do that. Have an earlier, lighter meal at, 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed so that that metabolic function of digestion is done. And so now all of the metabolic energy can be focused on the brain and the cells and tissues that need to be repaired and all the beautiful stuff that's happening in the brain. And, not to mention, let's not do damage to our cells or shoot ourselves in the body by not having sleep. It's literally associated, chronic short sleep is associated with increased cardiovascular risk, hormonal disruption, metabolic dysfunction, increased cancer risk, and reduced testosterone or the follicle stimulating hormones for women if you're thinking of conceiving. So we cannot look at sleep as sort of a bank that you can, you know, put your deposits in at will. No, it needs to reset every day, every day. Biology is keeping score. So the deeper question here is what have we normalized that our physiology is not going to forgive? What do we think we're getting away with?
Yeah, it's interesting for me. I experienced professional culture shock
Mhm.
when I joined a newsroom and a news organization, and senior producers had couches in their offices, and they would just shut the door and go, "It's nap time." And I was like, "What? What's going on?" This is a very intense environment of intense personalities. Everything is just intense. And I'm like, "What?" There's like a door, and I'm in a sign on the door, napping, do not disturb. And and yet these were the most successful producers in the business. But they knew. I mean, and it was systemic. It was systemic. And I really, for me, again, experienced that culture shock. But I was like, aha, this was definitely an aha moment for me.
I love that. We love to hear the tips of peak performers, what really works for them. I can
You
start
know,
to
you said something there that really, really during my heavy working years, that if there was anything that was going to be sacrificed, it was going to be sleep. It was always going to be sleep. You're not going to sacrifice the job. You're not going to sacrifice something that really has to get done. You're just going to do what you have to do. And if that means you don't sleep, then you don't sleep. And it's interesting to me how recently so much of the cultural norms that we allowed, um, the socioeconomic realities drive us in our biology, in our relationships. We've allowed the socioeconomic pressures to drive us into these incredibly unhealthy behaviors. I've always, during those years, I was always the least important thing is sleep, and then the scale went from there. And this is, yeah, and the fact that I can't catch up now, dang, I don't know what to do.
but it's good to know, right? When we know
Yeah.
better, we can make better choices.
And I think it's also just, reframing. So for myself, again, as I mentioned at the top of, the hour, I mean, it was really, it's just a framework, that this is for me, yeah, it's all about productivity, right? You got to be productive mom, productive this, producer, whatever. And then, now I'm thinking about it, I'm like, it's plumbing. It's just plumbing. We got to keep everything flowing back there. It's just back here everywhere. So I think that's where for me, it's really now, I mean, and especially going through body changes and, health, which is of paramount at this point in my life. And it's really, again, and it's a shift. It is a cultural, personal, shift. And so I'm so grateful for, his work. And so thank you again for sharing this.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And that's the opportunity he presents. It's like there are so many opportunities. If we just make a small shift and even 20 minutes a day of more sleep, that's going to just, you're going to start to feel better. You're going to start to function better. And then you'll see just how sleep deprived you are. So get his book. He provides a new vision and an appendix with like 12 tips. It's super, super cool. So let's wrap up with our last idea. Going back to what Urchana was mentioning about, performance and like this idea of the hustle culture, we're all in it. Everything is speeding up. We're being pulled outward into so many of these beautiful smartphones, iPads, everything's 24/7. So this society is quietly equating with normalizing chronic exhaustion. Is just the way that we are. So if you're tired, you must be doing something meaningful, right? Check in with yourself and really think about that. Like, do we feel like the impetus to always be on, to always be doing? Society is telling us if you're busy, you must be valuable, right? But he says, Matthew Walker, his research tells a different story. He says that chronic sleep deprivation reduces our cognitive accuracy, our creative problem solving ability, our ability to do emotional regulation, to have ethical decision making, to have empathy for self and others, and forget about leadership presence. So sleep loss increases, again, that impulsivity, the reactivity, and leads to more risk taking. So, in other words, most of our culture in modern Western societies celebrates this grind, this all on. And so it may be systematically undermining the very performance it's glorifying. So, where are you in your career, in your school, in your life stages? He's inviting us to go into a deeper layer, to view that sleep is not just biological recovery, it's in fact a daily return to physiological baseline, right? To return to zero, give ourselves 100% opportunity to be all amazing tomorrow, to have all that energy. He basically says it's a nightly recalibration, a built-in reset. I mean, that sounds amazing. You don't have to wait till January 1st. We can do it every single night. So when we override that reset repeatedly, he says, we remain in a mild state of stress activation. So if you feel like your nervous system is like always on, that stress, that fight, that always looking for what's wrong, what's missing, what do I need to look out for now? He says we are growing that in our bodies, like we've been talking about today. It's what we're used to, what we're being told to do. So that subtle reactivity is not only keeping us in that chronic low-grade fight, flight, or freeze mode, but it's also leading to something which is subtly disconnecting us from ourselves, from others, from our workplace, from our kids, from our society, from those larger questions that orient us to kind of what we're here to do in our daily duties, in our bigger purpose. So here in this space, we're always looking at ways to return to center, to who we are, what are our endowed skills and gifts and talents that we are here to share with the world, and how can we stay plugged in? So sleep as a new productivity lens can become so powerful, right? So let's look at the hustle culture. It keeps us in sympathetic dominance, right? The stress, fight, flight turned on. It keeps us in sort of cognitive overdrive. We're always thinking, we're always looking, we're always doing. And that performance identity, I'm doing, that's my identity, and I'm being rewarded for it. So just kind of thinking about which of these really fall in line with our current beliefs. How are they serving us? And how is it serving this ability to step more into an embodied awareness, mind and body and emotions, and connecting us together? So sleep is the most accessible nervous system reset available to us. And I think there's just so much attention being placed on this. It's been so fun to really look at this book and just give a real high level overview on it. So, why treat sleep as a weakness? I think we can shift from that, right? So, what are you guys now thinking as we start to wrap up with this last idea? How can we look at hustle culture in a new way? And
I can speak to, and I think you mentioned performance identity, right? So I think that's where, for me, it was a struggle, especially when I had my third child and I launched a startup. And I had two boys under the age of 7. I had a child I was nursing, baby I was nursing, and I started this company, and I had a team in the Ukraine of 6 programmers. So I never slept, and there was always something to prove. It's like and then when someone's like, "Oh, you're a mompreneur," I'm like, "I'm not a mompreneur. I've got teams here. I've got, it's just this constant like um, proving to myself and and to others, frankly, not even to myself, to others. And it was so tied to my identity. So I didn't sleep. See, I don't need sleep. I could just keep going like the Energizer Bunny. And I crashed. I crashed. The startup crashed, everything crashed. Um, because I couldn't keep going. I just could not keep going. And, it was again for me, that I always say I needed a parable shift, not a paradigm shift only, but a parable shift where it's like the hare and the bunny. I'm sorry, the hare, the hare and the tortoise, and I understand that at different points in our lives, we are the hare. When I was younger, I was the hare, and not just even now. There are times when I need to, the hare needs to show up. So the hare shows up. But find myself leaning more and more into the tortoise, the turtle. I need to go back into my shell. I need to sleep. I need to rest. And also the time of, fallow. We've talked about this, mirroring nature. There is something to be said in that time of fallow. And I have been willfully, intentionally in the time of fallow. That's where I am. That's where my spirit is. And I'm embracing that more because I feel in some ways it's a different kind of, I'm productive on a whole other level now.
I love it.
That's amazing. There's been several things that have stuck in my head, not to mention that terrifying 70%, but it's interesting. I realized that, you niggled something that in my younger days, I used to think of sleep as a bother. This is just something, I've got to do it, but damn, I don't want to do it, And I did eventually drop that because the information started coming out and saying you better sleep, especially as I started to study. I don't know if either one of you have heard of Dave Asprey, Asprey. He's the biohacker he's made the claim he's going to live to be 180. Yeah. He is big on sleep. He's the one that's really started me contemplating this. But you said something just a minute ago, Maggie, where we shift from sleep being just this kind of biological necessity to a physiological reset. And that snapped for me right there. I'm like, oh, I need to start thinking of this like my meditation. I need to start thinking of this like whatever I'm doing to rejuvenate myself I'm taking my supplements, I'm doing all these things to rejuvenate, and I'm thinking of sleep as a pain in the butt. It doesn't seem to jive there. So thank you for this. This is, that one sentence, it's not a biological necessity, it's a physiological reset. And I think that'll help me be more aware, more intentional as I approach my sleep.
That's it. Our job is done, right? It's just one idea to really connect with how this is impacting the big idea of sleep, understanding how it impacts our brain at different stages in life, how it impacts our body, right? And you have hope. The word is out. Organizations, forward-thinking organizations are playing into this to support their workers. So Aetna, with 50,000 employees, they now offer some sort of a credit for their employees who sleep and who through their health trackers can show that they're getting more sleep. Procter and Gamble and Goldman Sachs, they offer free sleep hygiene courses to their employees. They also installed high-grade lighting to regulate their circadian rhythms. Nike and Google have adapted a relaxed approach to work schedules, allowing employees to time their daily hours to match their individual circadian rhythms, right? So some people are night owls, some people are more, early risers, and there is some biological basis for that. So there's find out more in that in the book. And they've also installed nap pods. So they know that enhancing wellness helps to reduce absenteeism and increases productivity in the workplace. So there's so much goodness in this. And in the last chapter, he really goes into his vision on some, he calls them ideations, his tour of ideas of different ways that we can really look at simple ways for not only individual transformation of sleep, but also cars modulating, not just, how well you're driving, but melatonin or increasing our ability to focus on the road to decrease those traffic-based accidents, educational changes, as well as organizational changes. So this book is just chock full and is super inspiring, a book to have by your bedside. Maybe not, maybe when you're not able to sleep, you can pull this one out and read a few minutes, right? So you guys, we could go on and on for this, but basically, we're just looking at a reframe. What if sleep isn't the opposite of productivity? What if it's the new foundation of embodied leadership and health? This is like connecting the individual habit to how neuroscience works, to how we impact our health, and as leaders through public health, through our workplace habits and messages, through our culture, and through our personal embodied leadership. So as we zoom back out, as we're wrapping out, I'd love to hear your final shares, but what struck me was this conversation really isn't about sleep. It's about how we normalize behaviors and actions in societies. So in a way, we've normalized functioning while impaired, emotional reactivity as just a way that we show up as our personality. That being exhausted all the time is a sign of ambition, and that stimulation is a sort of strength. I mean, in a bigger way, this is kind of the messages we give in many different ways in our education, in our workplaces. And how do we then respond to these? What's got to give in order for us to, pursue all of these things in our life? But he says the science is clear. Sleep is definitely not passive. There is so much going on in the brain when we're sleeping, when we're dreaming. It is active restoration. It is emotional recalibration, and it is immune defense. So if you're here to look for ways to have cognitive refinement, then we encourage you to dive in, get the book, learn more, and dive in, go all in for that nightly return. So what he reveals in this book is really both simple and radical. There is no system in the body that is not enhanced by sleep. And there is no system that is untouched when sleep is chronically reduced. So sleep is not laziness, my friends. It is a biological alignment. And when we ignore that alignment long enough, we're literally going to drift subtly outside ourselves. So swirling back in, coming back in, for those of us who care about self-leadership, mental fitness, and that return to center, this habit matters because you cannot regulate what you have biologically destabilized. It's really about that. All right, my friends. So what is the foundational part? What stood out for you guys? Would love to hear your final takeaways.
I think, it is radical. As I mentioned earlier, like systemic reevaluation, and sleep as a celebration of whole body wellness, the whole body, and how it is truly integrating all these different parts, the back end. So this is truly a radical and an opportunity for, as I said, just systemic approach, like just really huge shift. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think that I've been taking steps recently, trying to eat better, more supplementation, getting my supplementation, getting my exercise, all this stuff. And for the first time, I realized I better add this to that list to make sure that again, you've terrified me with that 70% thing. I'm going to get some sleep. Damn.
Check it out. We're
Colin, that's
scientists,
perfect.
right?
Sorry.
We put on our lab
No,
coats. Put on our
Well,
lab coats. We do the experiments,
yes,
right? We collect the
right, right,
data.
right. And that reshift and prioritization, I think just this is now a huge priority for me. So right on. Absolutely.
that's exactly what happened. I did not expect this. Every time I come to these, Maggie, you surprise me. You shift me. So nice
It's
work.
it's the brilliance of what's out there in these books. We're just here to encourage people to really realize the magic that's in these books. One book can be life-changing. So we can just encourage you. Did this book land with you? If so, what's your next step? Are you going to buy it? Are you going to get it at the library? Are you going to listen to it on Audible? And what's your number one takeaway? What's your number one action? Like Colin was mentioning all these different ways that he could sleep. I sometimes love to use these, for nap times, or I love these heavy pillow things. You can like sprinkle lavender on it, and it just absolutely amazing. There's different things you can do, and then tracking. There's simple ways that we can learn to collect data on what we're actually doing and how we are showing up in life, right? So again, this book has been amazing. And if there's one thing I hope you carry away from today, it's this, that sleep is really not a luxury. It is a non-negotiable foundational aspect to our whole person wellness. And you know what? It's not a weakness. It is the most accessible, evidence-based reset that your brain and body can have. So, if we're here to practice lifestyle medicine, this is the foundation, the literal mattress that supports all of the 6 pillars of wellness, right? So, before you download another productivity app, before you optimize another morning routine, Matthew encourages us to first just protect your sleep. Why don't we approach sleep like a sport? Begin to train for it. What do we need? What kind of clothing? What's the temperature that best supports us? What time? Why don't we set an alarm to go to sleep? Getting some blue light glasses. All these tips are there for us to explore, and I'm so excited that you're here to just pick one of them and begin to put it into practice. So protect your sleep. Because returning to center doesn't start with doing more, as we said. It starts with allowing the body to restore what culture is trying to continuously override. And that's not indulgence, it's intelligence. Thank you so much, my friends. Thank you, Archana. Thank you, Colin, for this amazing, amazing book. If this landed with you, I want to invite you to come back next time. Next time, we're going to be looking at The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman, exploring how we give and how we receive connection, and how understanding those patterns might shift the way we relate at home, at work, and within ourselves. So if today's conversation stirred something in you, I hope that you'll come back, you'll continue the journey with us. Until next time, we pause, not to stop, but to pivot towards what matters. Thanks so much and take good care. Bye, everybody.